part, by the way, of the course itself, we're going to be discussing definitions quite a lot. So who was, I think it was Salah ad-Din. You mentioned Islamist movements. So we'll be discussing, that name, right? That label, um, and the applicability of it. I'm not going to try to convince you guys of whether or not to use it, but I want you to understand why you want to use it or why you don't want to use it. Okay. And that to me is important. Just to let you know, I use it. I use the word Islamist quite often in my work. But I can appreciate why people wouldn't. But not if they simply say things, I don't like the word. Yeah, I mean, that's simply not good enough. It's got to be as the result of some sort of intellectual exercise that they've gone through, and also have something as an alternative to use. Okay. And we'll be doing other things like that, in terms of, how certain words are deployed, how they mean different things in different places. This is another thing that I hope you get out of the course. I want this to be relevant to you as religious figures, particularly religious figures in the United States or in that context, but also to appreciate that these groups and these ideas will mean something different depending on where you happen to be. So, for example, in English, just to stick with this particular example, in English, the word Islamist carries a number of different connotations depending on where you are, what you're using it for, if you're using it on its own, or if there's a descriptive term attached to it, like political Islamist, or radical Islamist, or moderate Islamist, or whatever it is. Okay. When you take that word and you put it and you see the equivalent in Arabic, okay, which is Islamiyin, that's used extremely liberally in Arabic discourse on the topic of political movements with religious frames of reference. And it actually means something slightly different, depending again on the context. But it'll be used very, very often. Like you'll find people that I don't know if you people, I think most of you probably don't know who Douglas Murray is, and you should be grateful for that. Ruqayya, you probably do. You don't? Okay, then you have been blessed by Allah. Because Douglas Murray is a phenomenally awful far right commentator in the UK, who would use a word like Islamist as an insult or also as a way to get away from saying Muslim. Okay, and many people will. Many people will do it exactly for this purpose. But of course, you can't say then that anybody who uses the term in English or in Arabic means that, because of course many Muslims use it and they don't mean it in that sort of way. As an analytical category, there are going to be differences between Muslims who adhere to a particular school, like the Brotherhood, or certain types of Salafis that are engaged in politics. Like that, analysis requires categories, right? It becomes very difficult to analyze and explain the differences between different groups if you're not willing to actually categorize them in order to show differences and contrasts and similarities and so on. And if you say that like the use of the word Islamists in the first place is out of bounds, then what are you going to do when you see that actually in pretty much every Arabic speaking country, religious Muslims will use particularly this word to describe certain things? Okay, so it's not to say that you need to then take your cue. It simply means that you have to be aware of these different things in order to have an understanding of what is going to be most pertinent in your situation, in your particular environment. Hold on for 1 second, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So I really want you to be able to then, say, because America is not on its own, huh? America isn't, I know none of you think like this, but there will be, of course, people who think that, American Islam is where it's at, and that's it. And the world needs to follow the United States when it comes to Muslim discourse there. Um, that's not going to be something you find in my class in the slightest. At the same time, I think there is something unique about American Islamic discourse, and it needs to be appreciated and understood, both in terms of where it comes from, its history, its heritage, and it's of course still being developed as it's being developed anywhere in the world. But it doesn't exist as an island in the middle of nowhere. It connects to other types of discourses elsewhere, and that's really what the point of the whole course is, to understand how movements and discourses elsewhere impacted Muslim American communities and continue to do so. So what else on that? I'm gonna stop in a little bit for you guys to ask questions if you have any, but I just want to get through a few things first.
Yeah, in regards to American, like
So
a
just so
un
just sorry, just a second, guys. Because I want to. Okay, we can. All right, let's do questions on what I've talked about so far, and then because I wanted to go through the groups, but I think the groups you probably have different questions for that. So, go ahead.
uh, mentioning a type of uniqueness from American Muslim experience and discourse, was it America exclusively, not, and there's something different going on in the UK and other Western American Muslim or Western Muslim experiences, like, or was America
You mean
meant?
for this course?
No, okay, you just made a comment about there's a type of
Yeah.
uniqueness from, is it literally America itself or just the Western world
Yes.
in general?
No,
Okay.
no. I think that there's something quite unique to the United States, um, and something quite unique to Canada. Something quite, to be frank with you, on every nation state, there are different challenges. Um, of course, there'll be similarities and commonalities, and there'll be, I won't say exactly the same reference points, but there will be differences because of, how nation states have evolved in the 20th century. They define the history of all of these communities. I mean, the history of the African American community in the United States is not comparable, at least not identical, to how African Canadians, for example. I mean, there's not even a comparison there at all. When it comes to how legal systems are different to each other, and what sort of creative energies that is also spawned in different communities. I think that that's also something to keep in mind. Um, does that make sense? Yeah. And by the way, I mean, we won't go into this as part of an individual class, but for the purpose of, if anybody has any questions about this, then it's good to ask them at any point that they become relevant. But so for example, right now, you have for example, Indian and Pakistani communities in the United States, right? The socioeconomic class that Indian and Pakistani Muslims in the United States came from when they migrated to the US were actually very different than what you saw in the UK, for example, and on the European continent. And of course, there are reasons for that, but that's simply the reality of the situation. Okay. And of course, that has an impact in terms of uh, how they had impacts on community organizations, what sort of community organizations they set up, how they related to different places, in terms of their countries of origin, how they related to different groups as well. So all of that becomes very different. Um, yeah. I mean, does that make sense, Tara? Or are you asking me something else?
No, no. Thank you. Jazakallah.
Okay. Oh, oops, sorry about that. How do I? Ah, there we go. Type. All right. So, any other questions before I go forward? I want to discuss the content of the class. and why we picked these different topics. But does anybody have any questions? Okay. So, when it comes to the different groups, okay, now I had to pick in coordination with Bayan which groups to cover, okay, and we couldn't really do like a tremendous number, and we couldn't cover everything. So I had to take into account what you guys should have already studied, and also what would be most relevant, and a couple of wild cards just to make the course unique for all of you. Okay, and I do think it's a unique course. I've never seen a course that's like this at any university that I've looked and I know many of their curricula when it comes to Muslim political and social movements. Okay, not that covers this sort of breadth, and certainly not as many I won't say primary sort of sources, but they are kind of primary. Okay, so I'll go into this. First, I want to go into the different groups, but then also why we pick particular people. Okay, so probably on the first day, it's going to be, I mean, and unless this has changed, but I think everything should have been exactly the same as what I've intimated. The Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood, I thought was, indispensable for you guys to know something about because it has such an impact on how so many Muslim community organizations have been formulated over the course of the past, I'd say 50 years. Okay, I don't think that there's any doubt about that. Um, sorry, just a second. Um, when you think about ISNA, when you think about ICNA, when you think about MAS, when you think about Triple IT, when you think of all of these organizations and many others as well, quite frankly, there's a clear impact from that particular movement, historically speaking. We're going to go into what that means, okay, through the course itself, and particularly on that day. I'm not somebody who believes in, some sort of massive, big conspiracy, where there's, this tentacle-like kind of organization that's trying to manipulate everything and all of this sort of stuff. But it becomes pertinent, and it will become even more pertinent over the next couple of years because, and this I think you guys will see increasingly um, the government will try in some shape or form to prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood in an effort to restrict and prescribe Muslim American activity. So it becomes very important to understand what is this group? What does it mean? What does it do? What doesn't it do? We can't cover everything because the Muslim Brotherhood is such a wide kind of school and many different groups over the course of, you know, 80 years, more than that. Okay. And when we do go through that, we're going we're going to have Abdurrahman Al-Ayyash come and talk to us. Okay. Abdurrahman is of Egyptian background. He lives in the UK at the moment, actually, but he's of Egyptian background. He spent quite a long time in the US, and he's connected to a US institution. He's a fellow at the Century Foundation, which is a kind of progressive left of center think tank in New York City. And he's written some of the best work, quite frankly, on understanding the present state of particularly the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. So, um, so that's very relevant, I think, for all of you to understand. Sorry, there's something else that you should know about Abdurrahman, which you must have gathered by now by reading the materials. He was in the MB and he left, but the way that he left was very. You'll find other people who left the MB and it became quite radical in terms of how they then viewed the MB thereafter. It's important for you to be critical at the same time. Okay. Won't have a guest lecture for this. We're going to get um, a lot of work done on Jamaat Islami, which is I won't say derivative, it's not derivative, political Islamist universe to the MB, but for the Indian subcontinent. The MB actually had very little impact in the Indian subcontinent. In the Indian subcontinent, it was much more about Jamaat Islami. And Jamaat Islami also had very little impact within the Arab world. It was much more the MB. But when they get out of these two regions, they connect to each other, particularly in minority communities, but also elsewhere. Like you see that happen in Turkey to a limited extent. You see that in the in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. And you definitely see it in new minority Muslim communities quite a lot. So we'll discuss them. We'll discuss the different groups of the Jamaat Islam. They're not as wide. That's not the right word. You have so many different national versions of the MB worldwide. You have the Libyan MB, you have the Jordanian MB, you actually have several Jordanian MBs, you have the Egyptian, Kuwaiti, so many different quote unquote chapters or different groups that came about because they were inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood or they were actually official chapters. Okay. When it comes to Jamaat Islami, there were really just three. And that was in India, that was in Pakistan, that was Bangladesh. And you could argue that there were a few others, but they were really branches of one of those three groups. Okay. So we'll discuss that. On the second day, we're going to be discussing different types of Salafism. Okay. And I say different types because I'm going to make it clear on the first day that what we term in academia as quote unquote modernist Salafism, the political representation of that is the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, so that's Muhammad Abdul Rashid Rida, that's modernist Salafism. We'll go into that in some detail, but on the day. But of course, when people say Salafi nowadays, what they usually mean is what we call in academia purist Salafism or Wahhabism. Okay, and this is what Sheikh Abu Alia, otherwise known as Surkhil Sharif, is going to go into. Surkhil Sharif is very important in terms of understanding how that movement played a role in Western Muslim communities. Okay, so Surkhil Sharif was one of like 3 or 4 people who in the 90s was most responsible for the spread of the Salafi Da'wah in Western Muslim communities. You had Abu Alia, you had Abu Muntasir, and you had Osama Hassan. These were 3 of the most significant people in the 90s in Western Muslim communities, particularly in the UK, but they also had huge impacts on Anglophone communities outside of the UK. All of them left or became slightly different. No, actually, no, I'd say that's true. I'd say all of them left. So Osama became a lot more kind of progressive and liberal in quite a dramatic fashion, I have to say. And joined the Quilliam Foundation and became, a very different figure, publicly speaking. Very religious, but just a very different sort of thing. Surkhil Sharif backed away tremendously from the Salafi Da'wah, and actually for a time was really focusing on trying to repair what he saw as the damage that the Da'wah had done in Western Muslim communities. He's still a Hanbali, so he's retained that from his Salafi days. I don't think he's an Athari anymore when it comes to Aqidah. Okay. But he's definitely still a Hanbali in terms of his fiqh. And Abu Muntasir, He's definitely left the da'wah. I'm not sure what you could classify him now. I mean, they're all religious. They've all stayed religious, but they're just very different. Surkhil will go into how the da'wah played out in Western Muslim communities, the impacts that it had, and where he thinks is going to go going forward. Which again, I thought was going to be quite useful for all of you, right? Because there's no way that you can understand Western Muslim communities and American Muslim communities in particular without understanding what Salafism is and what sort of impact it's had on the development of these communities. I'm going to pause there just to give you guys a chance to ask any questions before I go on to more of the movements. Does anybody have any questions so far?
Well, this is Salahuddin. I I think this topic is going to be real good for me because in the Federal Bureau of Prisons,
Yeah.
we dealt we dealt with a lot of Muslim Brotherhood um, political prisoners. Um,
Hmm.
you know the blind sheikh. He was at um, he was at the prison I was at, and so
Really?
yeah,
Amr Abdurrahman was in your prison? Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah.
Hmm.
So we have more um, political prisoners. And so this portion of the class is going to be very beneficial for me, inshallah.
Barakallah. Uh,
I'm sorry, Professor,
Anybody who is designated, sorry, go ahead.
I missed, who did you say uh, that was part of the Quilliam Foundation? What was the name that you mentioned?
Osama Hassan.
Okay.
Now, the Quilliam Foundation, like, wound up. Okay, there is no more Quilliam Foundation,
Yeah.
but he joined the Quilliam Foundation. Which he's free to do if that's his drive. But my point is that he moved quite a bit in terms of his political outlook. Um, that was your question? So, by the way, just so you guys know, not everybody who is quote unquote designated as MB in public discourse is going to be claimed by the MB. So I don't think, for example, Abdurrahman was ever really like officially claimed by the MB. Okay. Whether or not he was inspired by their thought is another question. Whether or not he was a member is another question. In fact, that's something that Ayash goes into in his work, where especially after 2013, you had lots of little groupings of younger members of the MB go and essentially do rogue vigilante actions, but they weren't under the control of the MB itself. And then there becomes a question or discussion around, okay, what does that mean? Okay, who's in charge? Who's not in charge? But that'll be something we go into. But keep in mind, like there'll be many who sort of throw the label of MB around a lot, saying, this is MB, this is MB, like CARE is MB, ISNA's MB, MAB is MB, sorry, not MAB, MAS is MB, MAB is in the UK, Muslim Association of Britain. And it's partially true and it's partially false, and it's usually an excuse. It's partially true because these groups would have been formed by people who were either in the MB themselves like 40, 50 years ago, or were very strongly influenced by different MB figures. But it doesn't mean that they take their marching orders from any quote unquote Muslim Brotherhood organization. So denying there is any sort of historical connection, I think is silly, and I think is ahistorical. But it's also, why are you saying this? Like, what's the point here? Is the point for you to then say, then they should be prescribed as a terrorist organization or something? In which case, thank you very much. I mean, Islamic Relief was actually prescribed as a terrorist organization. You can imagine that in the UAE. And the only sort of reason that anybody could see was that it had historically been very clearly part of the wider Muslim Brotherhood universe, and continues to a much lesser extent today, okay, but continues to be as such. the Emiratis were and are still very, very viciously opposed to any expression of the MB. So one has to be aware that there will be these historical connections, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's, operational control or something. But again, we'll go into that in some detail sort of later on. Some of this might be more relevant than others, especially if you work in a source, for example, if you work in the civil rights space, then of course CARE is very active in that space. You can't really talk about CARE historically. I'm not talking about without mentioning that quite a strong connection to Muslim Brotherhood figures. Okay, which is very normal, and we'll discuss this on the day, inshallah, as well, because one of the reasons why you find that so many of the political organizations and the social organizations that were founded in the West by communities of migrant background is because you had disproportionately these organizations be started by people who were linked to those groups because precisely those groups organize, okay? And if they organize, they're the ones that organize. Political groups are the ones that organize, right? So disproportionately, they're the ones that are then going to organize when they come to the West, all right? And you had probably a disproportionate number of people be connected to those groups in the migrant communities that came because, frankly, they were in exile trying to escape political difficulty in their countries of origin. All right, so it's not to say this is good or bad. That's not the point. It's just how it happens. Okay. Okay, we'll go on to the next sort of three, okay, next three sessions. So the next session, we're going to go into Deobandis and Barelvis, okay? Again, this continues to be pertinent for the US. I think it's pertinent, frankly, across the West more generally, but anywhere where you have a representation of migrant communities that are rooted in the Indian subcontinent, Deobandism and Barelwism is going to be significant. Of course, in the US, you have not as many Dar al-Ulooms or madrasas connected to these two different approaches as you might in the UK, but they still exist. In fact, I think, is it three? I think there are three in Chicago alone, and they're pretty big ones. There might be more. And they're pretty big ones. One of them started by a Brit that came over to Chicago, Donald Paulson. So they remain quite significant. They're important to understand how religious authority also fits into those communities and how they then engage with other communities. Because, of course, Deobandism and Barelwism essentially means very little outside of the Indian subcontinent. It only really means something where you have people from the Indian subcontinent originally speaking, or actually in the Indian subcontinent itself. It has virtually no currency within the Arab world, within Turkey. You'll have connections. So you'll have muhaddithin, for example, in the Arab world. They will have in their asanid ijazas and connections to muhaddithin in the Indian subcontinent. But taking sides between, for example, is extremely rare, if it ever happens at all. Very famous example, Sayyid Muhammad bin Ali al-Maliki, rahmatullah alayhi, he was the sheikh of my teachers. He had ijazas from both the akabir of the Deobandi school, as well as the most renowned Barelwi scholars at the same time, despite what they would say about each other. Okay, and both would claim, because Sayyid Muhammad took the ijazah and said, yeah, but he also took an ijazah from that. And said, oh, he didn't understand. And said, oh, okay. This is very common me when you get into these sectarian discussions. Okay, we've come up to about an hour. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a break because I know I've thrown a lot at you. But before I do we have any questions?
I really did want to discuss a little bit about how Deobandism and Brailism do play in part, contribute to political movements wherever you find people from the subcontinent. I know there's a lot to probably say about that. It's very general.
There is, but we'll go into that during the actual day. Today, I'm not going to. I just want to give you guys an expression of why we picked different groups.
Okay.
I don't want to spoil the day. Okay.
Okay.
But by the way, that could be something you write about for your final essay. Okay. And we'll discuss, what we're going to do with the final essays, inshallah, as well. But I think we'll give you guys a bit of a break. And we'll come back, let's say, in about 15 minutes, because I've given you a lot to think about. Salahuddin, when do you have to sort of sign off? Will you be here when we get back or not?
Uh, Probably not, but I'm gonna. So I have to run into my prison to
Okay,
take
then you
somebody
go
in. So I
run.
might. So I might be able to come back out. If not, then yes.
Okay, well, not to worry. You let me know ahead of time. I appreciate that. We may, you and I might have a brief sort of meeting, or I'll catch you up when we actually meet in
Okay.
Chicago, or you'll run with it. But
Okay,
inshallah, we'll have
inshallah.
some time.
Okay,
Okay,
inshallah.
barakallah fikum. The rest of you, I'll see
Well, yeah.
you at let's say 10 past the hour. All right, so. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome back, everybody. We have a new student registered, Dr. Jibril. Probably checking to see if I've scared any of you away. Everybody else, cameras, please. Rajai, Rukayat. Oh, Rukayat, it's okay, not you.
Yeah, sorry, I just
I
trying to get
understand.
one ready and
No,
thank you.
no, it's okay.
Afwan.
It's all absolutely fine. You let me know. Rajai and Dr. Jibril, if he's around, or he's probably like joining us later. Type. So the movement was I'm gonna go through the rest of them. I'm gonna explain why also I would have loved in but for different reasons that so let's go on. Of connection expectedly or should if you hear me first with your hand. Can you all hear me?
It's a bit choppy for me.
Hello?
Yeah, you're freezing a little, Professor.
But can you hear me?
Sound is in and out.
If you
Okay, give me a
continue.
second.
Okay. Okay.
Give me a second. Okay, we'll try this again. Otherwise, we'll try some. Hmm. Can you hear me?
Now it seems okay. But you're gonna have to continue like a sentence or something.
Yeah, this is going to be a bit awkward for a few. And you can't hear me. It's the new us. Louise, we're going to also discuss Turkey. Now, Turkey, we're going to cover a whole bunch of different movements. I thought it was important that we cover Turkey because Turkey itself plays quite a strong role in American Muslim communities, not because there's so much, mind you, okay? There aren't that many Turkish Americans that are active in the American Muslim community at all. But I mean, they'd be more active in places like Germany and in Austria and in other parts of Europe. But certainly, you have quite an, I would say, an outsized kind of impact when it comes to Turkey's influence in the Muslim American community. And this is particularly true over the past, I'd say, 15, 20 years. And it's the result of Tayyip Erdogan really pushing within different Western communities, but especially in the United States. And you see that in places like Washington, where in Baltimore, in Maryland, they built the Islamic Center. It's a huge Diyanet center. And that's part of the quote unquote soft power kind of influence that the Turks are trying to have. So that makes a difference, I think, in terms of how Muslim American communities develop going forward. You've seen them, by the way, try to do the same thing when it comes to other parts of Western communities, particularly in the UK. So the Turks funded a lot of Cambridge Muslim, the Cambridge Mosque, that is led by Abdul Hakim Murad, Dr. T.J. Winter, and other places as well. This is about soft power. And we're going to go into, on another day, not particularly that day, we're going to go into the different types of, how should we say, religious geopolitics and their soft power impacts that come from different parts of the Muslim world on the West and on the Muslim American scene. So on this day, when it comes to Turkey, we'll be discussing the AK party. So that's the current ruling party in Turkey. We'll talk about the Nursi groups. So those are the groups that have their intellectual heritage connected to Buddhism and Nursi. And Dr. Mustafa Tuna, who's at Duke University, he's going to come and talk to us about that. Dr. Mustafa is Turkish. He's a real expert actually on really well. He came and taught the students last year. It went really well, so I've asked him to come back. Actually, most of what we're doing this year is a replica of what we did last year, and it all went really well. There's one or two changes. Not important to go into those changes, but I'll explain who are the new people that are involved as well. We're also going to be discussing on another day HTS. Now, HTS is the group that eventually led the final charge in Syria that overthrew the Assad regime. Okay, now I have to say this isn't going to have a tremendous impact on Muslim American communities. Okay, in terms of the actual influence of the group itself is not going to have a tremendous impact. I think what will have more of an impact is the subject of Syria over the next few years, because a new political reality has taken place in Syria. You've already seen, like this week, the interim president of Syria, Ahmed Shara, he will be addressing the United Nations General Assembly. And this is the first time that a Syrian president addresses the General Assembly in about 6 decades. Okay. So it's quite significant in that regard. There's a big Syrian American community, of course. And also another part to do with Syria, but not HTS, is the fact that Syrian institutions and Syrian figures have quite a significant role in the development of religious authority in Muslim American communities. So, Ruqayya, you're part of Rabata, I believe, right? Can you hear me, Ruqayya?
Yeah, I can hear. Yes, I'm in a shop.
Okay. So then you will know that Rabata exists because of Syria, right? That the religious points of reference are Syrian. And of course, Rabata is not the only one. There are many American figures today that studied the Deen in Damascus and in Aleppo, in coordination, of course, with these institutions of learning, like Mahad al-Fath in Damascus, also Abu Nur University, and of course at the hands of different scholars. So in that regard, Syria is relevant. I won't say that HTS itself is necessarily relevant, but I think because I don't think HTS has any impact at all on American Muslim communities. I will say that I included this because I think that Syria is going to be relevant for you guys. I also think that it's just really fascinating, and you guys, I think, will find it fascinating to see how a group went from being basically the Syrian outpost of Al-Qaeda, okay, then left it, okay, sorry, the Syrian outpost of what was then the predecessor to ISIS, and then ditched it, fought against it, by the way, became affiliated to AQ, then ditched that too, and kept on transforming until it got to the point, I'd say about 3 years ago, where it became quite similar, I suppose, to an MB movement, but really pragmatic, looking first and foremost to to conquer the regime, and then managing to do exactly that. So that transformation, which I think is very genuine, but also just really fascinating. And one of the best people to explain this is Jérôme Devron, who is a senior analyst at an analysis institution called the International Crisis Group. And he's written, I think, the best work when it comes to understanding HTS over the past decade. And he's done so by going actually to Syria, spent a lot of time in Idlib in the north, where HTS were actually running things, and then continuing to go back and forth quite a number of times over the past 6 months, over the past year, including the last 9 months. He's just come out with a really good book. I've read it on the development of HTS over the past few years. It's a fascinating book. We can sort of purchase, and I mean, you guys can order the printed copy, but it's so new. It literally came out, I think, just a few weeks ago. So it wasn't really possible. But he's going to present. And when he presents, there are some materials that he's written that will be available already, and they're in the syllabus. If anybody decides that they want to write on this particular topic, then we'll see about getting a copy of the book for that particular student or students, as the case may be. And later on, like by the time that happens, we may be able to do that. I'm not sure. But right now, it's so new. And we're very, very fortunate that he was able to spare the time to address all of us, to actually give, a really first-hand account. I thought you guys would find that interesting, and it will put you head and shoulders above, frankly, most people in the Muslim community in understanding this group, because you will have somebody who really engaged heavily with it over the past few years. I think I mentioned to you guys in the last class, Jerome himself is Muslim. He's a convert to Islam from either Belgium or France, I think Belgium actually, and a really top-notch scholar, in my opinion. We're also going to be discussing traditionalism and neo-traditionalists. That I think is self-explanatory because these obviously have quite a bit of currency in the Muslim community, in the West, in particular in the United States. We'll discuss the different types of traditionalists and neo-traditionalists, okay? Because the terms can be very confusing. And the categories that we'll be using, I'll try to be consistent with, accepted academic discourse thus far. So traditionalism, more generally referring to Guénonian groups, i.e. those that found inspiration in the writings of René Guénon. Neo-traditionalists are different in that they rely, how should we say, on the Holy Trinity of Nuh Keller, Hamza Yusuf, and Abdul Hakim Murad. But that's a different thing altogether, and we'll go into that too. We'll also go into how beyond these very, very Western kind of groups, there's another type of, how should we say, scholarly traditionalism that has become more rooted, especially over recent decades, where Muslims who study and go away to study, they realize that the universe is bigger than either traditionalists or neo-traditionalists, and they become attached to different institutions in the Muslim world, like Al-Azhar, like Dar al-Mustafa, like the Qarawiyyin, like Deoband, and other historic institutions of learning. We'll try to go through some others as well, but I mean, that's generally speaking what I hope to get covered over the course of those 6 days when we're in Chicago. I want to say a few things now before I ask you guys to give me any questions. I want to say a few things about why we didn't do others, because there were actually many others that I was hoping that we could do when I first formulated this course, but frankly, for time reasons, it just isn't that capacity. One, I was hoping to give you some readings and also some lectures around smaller groups that maybe you hadn't heard of before. So like Dar al-Arqam, which was a Malaysian group, which was quite small, but it's interesting to see how new religious movements come about. Murabitun, which was another Western group that had an impact on the Muslim community, particularly in the 70s and the 80s. Less so now, to be honest with you, but it certainly had impact on some of the more significant figures, actually, of Western Islam. But I won't say it's defunct, but it's kind of been wrapped up significantly so now. But we just didn't have a great deal of time. And I think we mentioned last time Nation of Islam and the community of Warithin Muhammad and those associated movements in the United States. And I'd raised this, I remember when we first conceptualized this course, but I was told that you guys already covered or would cover that particular part of American Muslim history as part of another course altogether. And that you would cover it in a lot more depth than I could as one of the movements that we cover in this particular course. Now, having said that, we had this last year, we had students, actually we had quite a lot of students who were connected to one of those movements or had at least been like deeply impacted by them. And some of them were still in those movements, not Nation of Islam, but certainly W.D. Muhammad, rahmatullah alayhi. And they wanted to write comparisons and contrasts and ask questions that related to that. And of course, people are more than welcome to do that. And they're welcome to propose essay titles, which I'll go into later on, that will relate to those particular movements. And this brings me to one of the last things I want to talk to you about, which was the final essay. So there'll be a timeline that you'll see in the curriculum. So I won't go into that. You can see that in the curriculum itself. But basically, relatively soon after we finish the residential, I want all of you to propose essay topics to me for you to write on. Okay, I'm not going to set essays for you to write. Okay, I want you guys to pick something that you can really, sort of sink your teeth into. But we will discuss the titles and what you're going to cover as part of them together. All right. But it's going to be relatively soon after the residential. You've got to send me these titles so that we can discuss individually, bilaterally, if these are going to be suitable, because they have to fit within the overall frame and theme of the course. Okay, it can't just be something that you guys come up with that don't relate to the course. And then also have pretty clear idea about what you want to focus on in the midst of that essay. So I think that that's all something that we have to do together. Keep to the timelines, okay? Because as part of this, we will have a bit of a back and forth, and it's important that we have that back and forth. Because if we don't, then when it comes time for you to actually submit, then you guys could write essays that you think are pretty good, but actually flunk the course altogether. Okay, so it's good to have like a back and forth. As part of this, I did this last time and I think I'll do it again. I'll probably look at drafts. And those drafts, they can be as complete as you want. Okay, and I'll give feedback. And that will be open to everybody. I don't know if all of you will take advantage of it. I hope that you do, because it will help you get the best grade that you can at the end. Okay, but that's only if you keep to the timelines. If you don't keep the timelines, then it's your responsibility. We'll have 2 classes, of course, after the residential, 2 Zoom classes. These will really be opportunities for you guys to ask questions and go through anything that we sort of need to wrap up. Of course, if there are things that are very specific to yourselves, you can also email me and we can discuss those over email. That's it really. Do you guys have any questions about the material that we're going to cover, or rather the topics that we're going to cover?
So I do actually, Professor. When you talked about Turkey and then you went to Syria, are those two separate days, or was Turkey or Syria
They're
assumed
separate.
under?
No, they're
Okay.
completely separate days.
Okay, because there was a choppiness, so maybe I lost you there.
No, that's
And
not
then
your fault. That's from.
so for the Syria part, it's interesting, especially as you're saying that right now it's very ongoing, very recent and fresh. I mean, with 1 million Syrians or so that went into Europe, apart from the ones that are in Turkey, is there anything about the Syrians? I'm actually interested in that because I did study 1 year in Aleppo at the University of Aleppo. But like, is there any influence that you think Syrians that are in Europe who might not be coming back to Syria, who have become Swedes and Germans? Is that something that we could look into or talk about?
I mean, we can do that bilaterally if you want. As part of
Okay.
your course, I don't think it's as relevant because
Okay.
there wasn't a mass migration that took place to the United States, which of course this course is focused on preparing people
Okay.
for.
Okay.
Also, when it comes to the European context, the outside of Turkey, you find exceedingly little impact on the broader Muslim community, except in, I'd say, Germany, when it comes to that recent forced migration. Because the religious references, they didn't go to these places. They went to Turkey, and they mostly went to Istanbul, or they went to other places in southern Turkey. But they didn't go to. I know literally of maybe I think just one person who went to Sweden actually. Sheikh Mu'min Al-Anan, who's a don of the Arabic language. He became Swedish. He settled in Sweden. But other than this, no, not really. So there won't be. I don't. If you were to propose an essay that looked at migration to Europe, I'd probably push back on it and say, like, we
Okay.
need to think about something that would be more relevant to the course. But it's a discussion that we could have.
Okay, no, that's good. Again, it's
So,
putting things into perspective, so that's really good.
no, that's good.
The Taliban, I mean, Afghanistan or anything, I mean, again, is if correct me if I'm
We
wrong,
won't
is
be doing
political
that.
movement? No?
Yeah. Oh no, definitely no. So the Taliban would have fit really well into this course. We simply don't have the time. So it will
Okay.
come into briefly on the discussions that we have on Barelwis and Deobandis, because of course the
Okay.
Taliban come from the Deobandi school. But we simply don't have enough time to go into that in more detail. But if people want to ask questions about it on the day, then they should do so. You've got an excellent scholar coming in to talk about Barelwis and Deobandis, who is Fariha Khan. I think it's on the last day. I think Dr. Fariha is going to be doing this on the last day. And she's excellent. She's a really good scholar. She's a very good academic, highly intelligent, and she knows this stuff really well. So that can be a part of what you do, inshallah. And if you wanted
Okay.
to if you want to discuss that, and if you wanted to discuss the Taliban as part of an essay, you'd have to figure out a way to make it relevant to what we're overall like aiming for in the course. But that's certainly applicable as a movement.
Okay. Jazakallah khairan.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Nothing on the topics. Anything about? Well, you'll have more details about the assignments in the actual curriculum. But my biggest piece of advice to you, take advantage. Because it's a doctoral program, I'm willing to do this. In undergraduate courses and master's courses, I wouldn't. But it's a doctoral program, so I'm treating your final assignment as kind of a little thesis, which is why I don't mind receiving earlier drafts and giving you guys comments. But if you guys don't take advantage, then you won't benefit from that. I would take full advantage of it because I won't give you detailed sort of feedback because then it kind of defeats the purpose of doing the assignment, but I will give you feedback and you'll be able to see what you need to improve on in order to really achieve the goals of the course and hopefully develop the skills that are required as you go forward, inshallah. Anything else on that? No. Okay, so do you guys have any questions about any of that? No? Okay. Type. All right. All right, and I think that we're done for the day, inshallah. Suleiman, stick around. As for the rest of you, nobody's got any other questions? All right, very good. I will see you guys, inshallah, in 2 weeks. Travel safely. And if you have any questions in between then and now, just email me by all means. But I look forward to seeing you guys in Chicago very soon, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hisham. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum
جزاك
salam
الله
wa rahmatullah.
خيرا. السلام عليكم.